So dumb.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Welcome. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Justin Rivers. I am Chief Experience Officer with Untapped New York. Always happy to have you with us for our programming today. I know I say this a lot, but I'm usually mean it, but I'm super excited about today's presentation. We have two great presenters, two very good friends of Untapped New York. One of which you have probably met before a couple of times, Aaron Asis, who is our artist in residence. He's also the filmmaker of the Unforgotten series. He is debuting with us today his Renwick Ruin film, which we are very excited to see. And then we also have the president of Friends of the Ruin, Stephen Martin, who will be presenting on the ruin and plans for the future of the ruin. So again, really great program that we have lined up for you today. As always, please say hello. I'll read off some hellos in a minute. Just so you know, in the chat, as always, I've loaded up some goodies. There's a link to Unforgotten Films. After Aaron plays the video, I will put the link to the video directly in the chat so you can access it again. There's also a direct link to Friends of the Ruin website, so you can see what's going on over there and Stephen's great work, which he will be presenting to you at the second half of the presentation. And also, I included a link to a key supporter of the Unforgotten film series, the Brooklyn Arts Council. With that, let me say hello to some folks and then turn it over to our presenters. Hello, Robin from the Berkshires. Blue skies. Yeah, but it's still really gross down here, Robin. I don't know if it still is in the Berkshires. Jeffrey Bernard, Upper West Side. Good to see you. Gareth, again, welcome from Wales. I hope Wales is temperate and nice, unlike New York today. Yes, today is going to be a fascinating topic, Gareth, for sure. Hi, Mel from Long Island. Joe from London. Nancy from Tuckahoe. Awesome to see you. William, or Bill from in Chatham. Richard, hey, Richard, you're back. I know your computer's working. So hello from New York to Hollywood, Florida. The Bronx Warriors, which was filmed at Renwick. That's right. Oh my God, I forgot about that, Gareth. Martha, good to see you from Hanover. Seth, hello from Jersey City. Michael from Toledo. Thank you, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come in, get comfortable. I am now going to turn the presentation over. First, we are going to hear from Aaron, who's going to do a little bit of an intro and talk to you a little bit about his film, who will play the film. And then Aaron will introduce Stephen when the film is over. So enjoy, everyone. I will be back at the end for questions and answers. Oh, and by the way, if you have questions, please put them in the questions tab. You can use chat to chat with each other or just sort of share any information that you have. All right, Aaron, it's all you. We will see you at the end.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Untapped. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I apologize for sounding like this. I have a frog in my throat. So we'll just make the best of it. Unfortunately, the film will do most of the talking for me. But I wanted to just introduce for a second what we're hoping to accomplish with this film. Looking at the Renwick Ruin, looking a little bit at Roosevelt Island, presenting some of the background information through collective voices. We have Riak featured on this, the former president, Stacey Horn, a great author of Damnation Island, Judy Birdie. If you don't know Judy, you need to. Roosevelt Island Historical Society, and obviously Stephen is featured prominently in this as well. So I am going to just kick it off to the film and get us started that way. I do hope that everybody brings their questions, looks forward to the film. And I think that we're presenting information on this particular event to jog those questions and build excitement and interest. So Justin, go for it.
Renwick Ruin was originally built in 1856.
So, excuse me. With that, I think we're very lucky and honored to have Stephen Martin here. I think the film does, hopefully you all agree, it does a job of introducing not just the ruin, but also Roosevelt Island, and I think just some topical things that are probably striking a little bit closer to home over the past year than maybe they did before, about topics related to quarantine and the history of the island. But as a background piece of information, I think that's just one piece of it. But what Stephen has been working on for a number of years with Friends of the Ruin is what to do moving forward. And I'm really excited to hear him present to all of us about some of the things that we can start to look forward to, or at least some of the hopes for what the future of the structure can be. So Stephen, take it away.
I take it you can see me, but you can hear me, but can't see me. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm trying to get my camera back on. 1 second. I'm sorry.
Stephen, we cannot see you.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
We also cannot hear you. I think you are talking.
Oh,
can you hear me?
I can hear him.
Oh, you can hear him? Stephen, if you
for some reason my
earbuds in, perhaps take them out. Because we heard you in the beginning, but maybe we cannot hear you now. Oh, you can hear him, Joe? Okay. All right. All right, then I can't hear him. All right, that's fine. Okay, Stephen, then you're fine. All right, Stephen.
Okay.
Go for it. The thing is, you know what, Stephen? I cannot hear you, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to queue up your presentation, and you can just start without having to cue me in. Okay.
Great, Aaron.
Bye.
Aaron, you'll tell him that's good.
Yeah.
Aaron, thank you so much for that video, and also to Untapped Cities. Thank you so much. I'm going to work to get my video back on. But in the meantime, I really just, Aaron, that was a very powerful documentary. Thank you for that. As Aaron stated, my name is Stephen Martin. I represent an organization called Friends of the Ruin. We were founded actually before the COVID-19 pandemic, with really this, as Aaron so beautifully illustrates in the video, how do we go about putting together a purposeful plan to save this structure? And I used to work at Four Freedoms Park. I was its director of design and planning, which is the Louis Kahn Memorial directly south of the Smallpox Hospital. And have, kind of over the course of the memorial's construction, I saw this building crumble over time. Actually, Hurricane Sandy took out several of its walls and interior walls, and I've been advocating for this building. We've found kind of wonderful partners with organizations like Untapped Cities and Aaron's work, as well as at the state level. The State Historic Preservation Office, which is an agency of the Parks Department, has provided about $750,000 of work towards stabilization studies. We have an architect on board called Walter B. Melvin Architects, and we are doing studies as we speak. As you know, the building sits, you can see it here. It's directly north of the FDR Memorial, which is called Four Freedoms Park, and directly south of the Cornell Technion campus. It sits quite thoughtfully in the middle of the southern end of the island. Interestingly, and as Aaron alluded to, we find the site to be uniquely meaningful right now. It was designed in 1854 by the same architect, of course, who did St. Patrick's Cathedral and Grace Church, as a site of quarantine. If it was discovered that you had in the 1850s smallpox, you were taken from Manhattan by police force and you were brought to this stone building. It was built entirely by prison labor, and it opened in 1856. It could house about 100 patients at a time. And those who could afford medical treatments were given the top floor, and those who couldn't were given the bottom 2 floors. But kind of in keeping with this uniquely meaningful site, not only did it serve as a site of quarantine, after the building closed, and Aaron mentions this in the documentary, it became a nursing school and was really training New York's front lines, largely around maternity. And it served as a really quite a renowned nursing school for almost 60, 70 years. We think the building closed in the 1950s, and really the nursing school closed in the 1950s. And it has been this evocative ruin ever since. When, for example, Louis Kahn came to the site, it was in pretty bad shape, the building itself was. And I do love this quote by Louis Kahn. He said, I have this kind of vision that all of my buildings would look beautiful as ruins. And so kind of incredibly evocative that this building now sits directly north of his memorial. The building is also, in speaking about the FDR Memorial, the FDR polio story is incredible. He got polio. He was swimming up in Canada with some Boy Scouts, and by the end of that night, one of the boys had it. By the end of that night, he was paralyzed and would never walk again. So you can imagine his work with the Salk vaccine and the March of Dimes is an incredible piece of this. But also the building is very much in the shadow of the World Health Organization and United Nations complexes. It's a fitting memorial site. We see this as a wonderful site to memorialize the incredible efforts, not only in New York, but across this country with regards to the incredible efforts around public health. Here's kind of a rendering that we've done. We'd love to see the building remain a ruin, not to be brought back to what it once was as a hospital or a nursing school, or even repurposed as a different building of sorts. We think that its most evocative qualities are that it is still a ruin, and we would like to stabilize it as such. That is, of course, incredibly challenging. If you meet with our historic preservationists and engineers, to stabilize a ruin is quite complicated. And if any of you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. The spaces inside are beautiful. Sunlight kind of streams from within. It has this see-through quality that only a ruin can have, free of glass and mullions. And if actually this is a rendering, but this is actually what the space feels like. Aaron has tracked it within this space often, and I think Aaron would agree this rendering is essentially an upgrade to what it currently is. Of course, the building is an active ruin presently, and so how do you go about stabilizing that? We also feel that this is a memorial that needs to have an online memorial component. How do you tell the story of those who have died, not just of COVID, and of course, smallpox and polio, but the efforts at the front lines to kind of get us through these challenging times. Here's where we are to date. We have received, I mentioned we have about $750,000 from the state, which has been matched through public and private support. Currently, we have a historic preservation team complete with, we're doing soil studies on the site. Our historic preservation team, of course, Walter B. Melvin, is working with a remarkable engineering team to figure out how to stabilize this. We're also partnering with local New York City schools to teach historic preservation. One is the Williamsburg High School of Architecture and Design. Our first phase is kind of a fundraising of this project. It's going to be quite expensive. To stabilize a building like this, I don't mean to give you all sticker shock. We think it'll cost around 25 million just to stabilize the walls. Of course, the soil is hot. You can imagine a nursing school in the 1800s with labs produced a lot of things like mercury and lead, and those are deep within the soils. We do work closely with the island, and including Cornell Tech. One of our board members is the head of the architecture program at Cornell Architecture School, as well as maintaining partnerships with on-island organizations like New York City Health and Hospital, Four Freedoms Park Conservancy, and working to ensure that this educational memorial component is complete. I'll close my presentation there. By the way, if any of you have any questions, you can, I know Aaron would field them all, I will as well. My email is just stephen@theruin.org. Justin, I'm gonna close this presentation.
Stephen, I'm not sure if Justin can hear you, but Justin,
Okay.
You can bring back the faces now.
Okay, hello. Aaron, for some reason, excuse me, everybody, I'm having a technical difficulty that nobody else is. Aaron, can you speak?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and I can hear, I cannot, for some reason, I can't hear Stephen. And I have refreshed the page 3 times. I've signed out and signed back in. So that will make Q&A a little bit difficult with Stephen. So Aaron, what I'm going to do is, since you can hear Stephen and everybody else can, why don't I have you do the moderating on that side? I'm also happy to jump in whenever need be, but I couldn't hear it. So, and I'm not sure why. In which case, if there is anybody who has questions for Aaron or for Stephen at this time about either one of their projects, now is the time. I see a question did come in.
Justin, before we do that, can I just respond to Stephen's presentation?
Yes, please do, because that would be great.
And there are a couple things that really stood out. And Stephen, I mean, you made the reference while looking at the renderings and sort of the challenges associated with preserving ruins and how sort of that quality. I mean, I've been a ruin guy for a long time, and I think one of the things that's really compelling about the renderings you showed is it's a way to open up that ruin aesthetic and sort of the embodied energy of a ruined space to the masses. And I think that that's a beautiful suggestion and something that, quite frankly, doesn't really exist very often, especially not in this country. And I think to honor our history by trying to, freeze a moment in time and allow people to sort of access it in real time and space, I think is really kind of a special thing. I also just wanted to say about, sticker shock. I think that there are many insiders in the room that have heard many astronomical numbers about things related to preservation or subway restoration or all the things in the city that cost tens of millions of dollars. It is an unfortunate reality, but, not to play the other side of sticker shock in this case, but I do think $25 million, relatively speaking, is a lot of money, but, there are sillier things that cost more money, I would argue. And I think that it's really, it's noble to have such a clear direction. I think having sort of the united front, having collective buy-in from different agencies at different levels, city, state, et cetera. I really do feel lucky to have, been able to work with you on this, just to know of the organization, to see the things moving forward. The relationship to Four Freedoms Park is also exceptional and special. And I think, being able to open this site up would just create like another layer of magic at the southern end of the island. And I just think, there's been so much change on the south end of Roosevelt and so many things have been lost. It would be a real shame to lose this final piece. So I just really appreciate that presentation. I really appreciate the work you're doing. And I just wanted to say those things.
Oh, thank you, Aaron.
Awesome.
I agree. It's a very special building because it's one of a kind in New York. And I think I mentioned this, that it still exists there against all that is kind of concrete and glass on both the Manhattan and Long Island City shorelines is testament that this building, is stubbornly there and needs to be preserved as a ruin. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Justin, Stephen is done talking. So
okay,
if you
I'm
want to...
watching. I feel like Dave Bowman in 2001 because I'm watching Stephen's like voice thing pulsating, and I'm trying to. I'm like, okay, I think Stephen's done talking. This is the oddest experience I've ever had. But the question that came in, which I believe is directed towards Stephen, is, are you under any constraints because it is a landmark? Which is from Martha Clark. Good question, Martha.
Martha, that is a great question. Yes, the building, New York City's landmarks division actually has designated it a ruin. It's not designated the Smallpox Hospital in its designation. It's actually designated the Smallpox Hospital ruin. So if you think about it, it really is our city's and probably our country's only landmarked ruin. Another important piece of this is it has a federal and state designation as well. So we have kind of the trifecta of designations here. So you could imagine, yes, it's going to be hard to kind of work through all of those. That being said, I think, it is, if a developer came through with $60 million and wanted to turn this into a restaurant, I would believe the city and state would, of course, allow that to happen. And that's why we are very eager to push on this, that it becomes and stays as a piece of public art and public space. So that is a good question. In terms of just very quickly, we've never actually located, and I don't believe they still exist. They might. The very original architectural drawings done by James Renwick. They might be in someone's private collection. They're not at Columbia where the Renwick archives are. So there's really no record of that history. There is, of course, record of the when the building was added to, the northern and southern wings were added in the early 1900s. And we have drawings of those, but nothing that could, for example, restore it to what it once was in the 1900s.
Stephen, you mentioned that if a developer came in and wanted to, pump 60 million into it and convert it into a restaurant, that would probably be something the city would allow. But would they be allowed to, considering the preservation status or the landmark status?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at kind of what happened on the northern end of the island, there is the penitentiary that was turned into luxury housing. If the right muscle comes in with the right money, and New York City needs that tax revenue now more than ever, as does the state, I'm sure that they would, at least consider plans like that. We have, and so we're hoping that's not the case, and we would love to secure a development agreement with the city and state, really with the state, that we develop the site on behalf of the public, for the public.
Justin?
Okay. How the next question that came in was from Joe Holmes, also a very good question. How does the hot soil cause a problem for stabilizing the ruin? Is it a problem regardless of the building? I visited the island a while back and loved the atmosphere around the Ruin Hospital and the FDR Memorial. Also
Great question. Joe. Yeah, Joe, awesome. The hot soil is in New York City and really throughout the country. If you have hot soil, you're going to have to cap that soil with 2 feet of clean soil. So then you've created issues with things like, drainage. So you actually have to dig down and you have to really remove that soil. When you remove that soil, you create issues for the building where, it could, the soil right now is actually stabilizing the building. The foundations are quite small. So you can't remove that immediately. You actually have to put in more stabilization to the building before you can even remove the soil. Also, to remove soil, we had to do that at Four Freedoms Park. It is a very expensive process. We shipped it all off to Jersey. They seem to love hot soil and brought in new soils. It's an expensive project. It's also, one that puts the building at risk for a little bit of time. I agree with you. I think the 2 buildings side by side, the hospital and the FDR Memorial, sit very purposefully. You know, I remember one writer talking about how the building almost feels like the remnants of bombed out Dresden. And you see that as compared to the FDR Memorial and kind of this site of perhaps there's some sadness, but also a bit of a phoenix rising from the ashes.
I just want to say, because I don't want to deprive Justin the chance of having heard one of the things that you just said, Stephen. As
I'm hoping to hear him in the recording later.
As a New Jersey boy, Justin, Stephen was talking about the expense of removing hot soil and how Jersey was very excited to take the hot soil from Four Freedoms Park because Jersey loves hot soil. So
we do love our hot soil. It was one of the reasons I left. Aaron, just cue me when.
Oh yeah, you're up.
Oh, okay. It's so weird to have an intermediary, but it's kind of fun. Gareth has a great question regarding filming the Bronx Warriors from 1982, which you mentioned in the chat. Given that filming happened when there were no barriers to keeping the public out, would activity like this have caused more damage to the ruin? Was it dangerous for a film crew to be in there before proper preservation work started? And that's interesting. And Aaron, that could also dovetail into some of your experiences, how you got into film, because it was sort of just like sort of serendipity and good luck that you got in there to film, right?
Yeah. And I'll just say, and Stephen, please feel free to chime in also on this point, but the ruin is not publicly accessible. I mean, this is not something that people are parading in through, and it's not something that, film crews are, having free reign to move in and out and showcase the space. There has been some preservation stabilization efforts made. There are still high risks. I know that there was a significant collapse about a decade ago on the north side of the structure. So to allow people to have free reign to move through it is not in anybody's best interest right now. There have been preliminary measures gone to stabilize and basically try to stop it from further decaying, or at least further crumbling, but it is not in good shape. We were not in there with a very robust crew. It was just a few people, hard hats, watching our feet, running around, just trying to get in and out as quickly as possible. I think in our particular case, we are much more motivated by showing that interior experience, and especially when you sort of compare them with the renderings that Stephen showed, and you can see the potential. If you have motion video moving through the space, you can really start to imagine that potential. And I think, to help the public and to help the potential powers that be, rally behind the future preservation of the structure, we felt it was really important to get some of that motion video footage to just help compel or create that compelling image, to help sort of, just different levels of people understand how magical that interior could be as a unique space. That said, as Justin mentioned, there wasn't necessarily a magical formula. It was, just kind of asking the right people and just being as careful as we could in a moment and being as quick as we could in and out. And I don't anticipate that film crews will be going in there anytime soon. And there weren't film crews that were going in there before. And we really just lucked out and are happy to kind of share our good fortune with you all.
I sort of wonder, thinking back to Garrett's question about would a film crew going in the early 80s, sort of what was their access like back then? I mean, I know that there are definitely historic photos of Roosevelt Island from the late 60s into sort of the early 80s where there, a lot of the abandoned spaces, which are now landmarks, where you could go in it, they were accessible. Nobody was stopping you because nobody thought, why would you want to go there? Yeah. And I don't know. And again, perhaps Stephen could address it. And hopefully I'll hear the answer at some point. Was there an amount of damage done in the city's declining period of the 70s and 80s to these spaces? It's one of the things that people ask all the time on sort of our Flushing tour. Did anybody graffiti the column of Jerash because it was out there? Was there any kind of damage like that done, during those decades to the ruin?
Well, and I also think that these spaces, they're not unique to New York. They exist all over the world, right. And they're not all, regulated or governed in any way, shape, or form. So crews and people and curious toms are moving through these spaces all the time. I think in the 70s and 80s, New York was not in a position to regulate how people move through these spaces.
Right.
And I think there was a lot more free reign to do that. And I think now, for better or worse, we are in a position to have a little bit more luxury to regulate some of those things. But naturally, of course, when you have unregulated people traveling through spaces that are, you know, vulnerable, they are going to cause wear and tear. And you know, you can look at examples from any Rust Belt city in the country right now, and there are spaces that have gone through very similar things that still aren't being regulated, and people are moving through shooting videos in there all the time.
Right. Well, and I think in the chat, Aaron, I don't know if you've been seeing this, or Stephen, if you've been seeing it as well, but so Robert Morbeck mentioned the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, which I know, you know, was a big spot for you, and how there's sort of been more access gained by that. Also, Pete Tannen brought up a very interesting point about Ellis in the chat as well. He said stabilization as opposed to restoration is a very good idea in response to Stephen's presentation. I've been to Ellis Island both before and after the main building was restored and repurposed as a museum, and I had an entirely different experience both times. To experience the feel of Ellis Island, I much preferred the pre-restoration version, which I have heard multiple times from people who remember going over there in the early 80s, you know, or late 70s, running around, taking pictures of the registry hall. And, you know, that experience is gone now in the fact that it was restored and turned into a museum. Obviously, it gives greater, safer public access for people to appreciate the space. But it's sort of, when you go over to the hospital on the other islands, as you well know, at Ellis Island, you feel there's a lot more of an emotional experience that happens when a space is stabilized and not restored. So Pete, I agree with you, and I think that that is an interesting point about this space as well, with the ruin.
Well, and I think the Eastern State Penitentiary example is also, it's a unique example. It's a preserved ruin. I mean, their intentions were never to have it be anything but, and even now that it's sort of moved into a more publicly accessible, a little bit more visitor friendly model of itself, there are still wings within that compound that are not accessible to the public because they haven't been brought up to a certain level of safety code. So I think that, you know, if anybody has a chance to go down to Philadelphia and check that structure out, it's totally fascinating. And, you know, every year it changes a little bit more. And I do think that you lose some things, but you gain some things as you sort of, you know, work to stabilize certain components of it. But that's a very unique model, which is even different from the example at Ellis, both the museum side and the hard hat side. So it's not without precedent to preserve something as a ruin. It's just that the model that you have to follow and the ways that you can sort of go about funding it become very, very tricky, and there's no real blueprint for that.
Before we get to the next question, I saw in the moderator chat that Stephen asked you a minute ago, Aaron, if you could hear him. Did you hear Stephen? Because maybe now you can't hear him either.
No.
Try talking and see if Aaron can hear you.
Stephen.
Maybe Stephen can't hear us. This is almost like Theater of the Absurd a little bit.
We've completely lost Stephen.
Well, oh, Stephen can hear us. Okay, so we just might not be able. Stephen, why don't you refresh and try to come back in, and maybe that'll at least get you back to Aaron in the audience. I'm going to go on to Joe Holmes' next question, because actually I can even help with this one, but Aaron, you may know, and Stephen, when he jumps back in, can try. Joe asks, might there still be people alive who trained as nurses there? I guess they'd likely be very elderly. Are there any records? Aaron, I don't know. Do you have any? I mean, this is a really great question for Judy. And I don't know if Judy is on the talk today. I don't know if I saw her on there. But there are, I know that there were for a long time basically elderly women who trained as nurses. Judy Birdie also puts out a really great daily Roosevelt Island historic newsletter every day. And actually one of the ones in the past day or two were about the nurses who trained. And if I have enough time to go into my email too, I think it was either today's or yesterday's. It was very recent. Yeah. I will put a link to that in the chat, Joe, or send it to you. directly. But of course, there are still hospital care facilities on Roosevelt Island. There are still nurses there. They're just not trained there any longer.
Right. I think
Stephen
you can
is
all
trying
hear
to
me.
talk. Do you
Yeah,
hear
you can hear me
Stephen,
now,
Aaron?
right?
Yeah, Justin, I hear him.
Okay.
He's speaking. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I don't know
So go
what's
ahead,
going on,
Stephen.
but yes, a couple nurses are kind of daughters or grandsons of nurses have stopped by every once in a while and say, "Oh, my relative worked here," and it's a very sweet thing to discover. Unfortunately, and actually, we have just a couple weeks ago, we've been in touch with the New York Academy of Medicine, which keeps records on these types of things. And I don't know, Aaron, if you've had any relationship with them. They're terrific, and they keep kind of a wonderful record of different medical institutions throughout New York. And so they've been looking into this very thing. I would love to share it both with you, Justin, and you, Aaron, when we have it, because I think it's an important story that has been forgotten.
And I think that's one of the great sort of sub themes here is, there's a lot beyond just the structure itself. There are a lot of these sub stories that can all be sort of tangentially related to preserving the structure and commemorating it in some way.
Yeah. No, that's an important one. Oh, also, I mean, in terms of other movies filmed there, we of course have Spider-Man. We have, the Green Goblin fight down in the first movie was there, as well as the Michael J. Fox movie where I'm just now spacing it, if anyone in the chat knows, where he imagines it as kind of a building he might restore and turn into a home of sorts. It's an 80s movie, Michael J. Fox. It's a pretty, building makes a prominent place in the movie.
Justin, you just missed a Michael J. Fox reference.
Oh.
How much space is there inside the ruin? I see that question. It's actually a pretty small. The building's footprint is about 100 feet. It's essentially 300-foot by 40-foot bays. So if you think of that, it's quite small. It's about a 12,000 square foot footprint. 12 to 14,000. So it looks quite huge and quite large when you're careening up the FDR. But then when you witness the building, and Aaron can speak to this even, very well, is it feels quite intimate when you're standing right next to it. It feels much like a kind of a New York City townhome in terms of scale, maybe 3 of them stitched together.
Yeah, it's actually one of the remarkable things about the structure is the volumes, even without roof structure and with the walls, windows, mullions kind of missing in places. It's still very intimate. It's very cozy. It's very, clearing it out and having it be a little bit more of a folly with landscape elements around it. It would feel very fitting. I mean, I almost can't even imagine what this building would have felt like as an enclosed building with rooms and doors and a roof on it, because it feels really tight as it is. But it is charming in its proportion. And I think the 2 wings with the central axis in the middle and kind of the central entry, it feels very classic. And when you're in it, you do feel directly oriented with all these little kind of nooks and crannies off to the side, but they're all very small spaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very, yeah.
Justin, do you want to?
Actually, one of the things I was going to say, and again, I'm just watching Stephen's light pulsate. But to what you said, Aaron, one of the things that amazed me, I remember the day you said you got in there to film. It was Robin, who is on this talk, may remember it was the day of the Guastavino tour, where we ended the Guastavino tour at the Roosevelt Island Historical Society kiosk. You were leaving. I just missed you guys getting access to that. And of course, the pandemic was about to hit about 3 days later. We was going to shut everything down. And I remember you sent me the pictures. And to see the ruin from the other side, for years, I've only seen the front of the ruin. And to see how, like you said, intimately, even with no roof and very few walls, you could sort of, your pictures, which some of them are on the article we ran last week about the film, or maybe that was 2 weeks ago, they really give you an idea of that space and, sort of gives it a really kind of almost like mystical, it was like druidic kind of almost in a way, the way, the Gothic gabled windows and, which was a Renwick thing. Renwick loved that stuff. But Your pictures from the other side were just incredible to me because it was a side of Renwick nobody sees, and that was obviously featured in the film as well, which actually dovetails into another good question Richard Roth had. How much space is there inside the ruin? Does it, Stephen, square footage?
He just answered that, Justin.
One thing I would say about Aaron, your photos, which I think capture, and it'd be lovely to even bring them up right now. But one thing that I really appreciated about your photography was it captures kind of that hand-built quality of especially the center bay. The center bay, kind of that original smallpox hospital structure. You see, of course, the exterior walls are these beautifully kind of square and orthogonalized granite. And just so our audience knows, those were quarried on Roosevelt Island. But then on the interior, kind of what would be the interior spaces, those are really they just were using almost kind of shattered rock and infill. And so you get this wonderful textural quality between the exterior and the interior. And I think that's what makes also this space so amusing and so kind of charming as you walk through, and you're expecting, kind of your expectations are a little bit challenge. You see kind of this stately building from the exterior, and then you walk in and you see these hand-touched aspects of the building. And it feels like, in a sense, there was someone there yesterday, there was someone there, 100 years ago. And I would love to kind of keep that.
Yeah. And I think that's very present in that rendering that I keep going back to that you showed during your presentation, Stephen, is you see those touches in that interior, rendering with the wood strips and kind of like the stone touch and the little touch of human scale touch of things, which is not something that is super present in our lives anymore. And you made some really compelling points during the film about how the city is, really pushing in a direction and really is motivated by building new shiny things. And I think that's kind of an inevitable market force. But it is really important for us to also be able to hold on to the things that were sort of motivated or at least built in a different way. And I think when you're inside a space like this where you can see and feel that direct connection to another person, and I'm not even talking about the people who are actually, hospitalized in that structure, but the builders or just the details that you're talking about, it really does, humanize and create a more humble experience on the inside. And it does provide a certain level of comfort that is hard to explain, but you feel it for sure. And I really do appreciate you kind of like singling that out as being related to the scale of touch and those elements inside, because again, I don't know how often we come across those things anymore, even in old buildings that have been, a lot of those things have been covered up or, renovated out or things like that.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah. Justin?
Thank you. I feel like Stephen is like unlocking the secrets to life, and I'm just like, oh, great. Next question. When Pete Tannen asked, when one looks for Renwick ruins on Google Maps, it shows the small restored building to the north of the actual ruin labeled, quote, Smallpox Memorial Hospital, ruins of a 19th century hospital, close quotes. I've been there, but forgot, what is that building being used for now?
Great question. That is actually I believe the building, and I don't have Google Maps up, is the Strecker Memorial Laboratory. That was built in 1892. That was actually a pathology lab. And it was designed by Frederick Clark Withers. And it actually, by 2002, it was also a ruin. And it's funny, I know Judy went in there and she literally, I think she found skulls and kind of jars of different pathology studies. And but it's now functioning as an MTA substation. It was restored in 2002, beautiful restoration of the building. But if you were to, I believe it is, just south of it is actually an emergency exit for the E-train. The E-train goes under the southern end of the island, and you can crawl down those stairs and probably find a scary tunnel. And if you were ever stranded on the E-train, you would pop up at the smallpox hospital.
Oh my God, I am going to bite my tongue as hard as I can to not run down a rabbit hole of MTA ventilation shafts and emergency exit pop-up points around the city, because that is a whole nother thing.
Good.
But yeah, Justin.
Let me see. I don't think any more questions came in. But then in the chat, Pete then acknowledged, yes, I now remember that sign stating that it was the old lab. Pete also further up the chat brought up a ghost town in California, Bodie State Historic Park, as another example of sort of a town preserved in arrested decay, and then a link. Thanks for that, Pete. It is interesting, sort of in the West, you have these communities that are preserved this way. You know, New York, we have buildings, but in the West, you can almost have all of a whole town that has been abandoned. Gareth also mentioned that Michael J. Fox movie was Bright Lights, Big City. Oh my God, I forgot about Bright Lights, Big City. And let me see if there's MTA ventilation shafts and emergency exits would be a great topic for an Untapped podcast. Hint, hint. Taking the hint, Pete. And actually, they are so what's really interesting about Roosevelt Island on that topic is the new East Access cooling tower ventilation shaft, which they're doing a really great art project on. So, Pete, that is a good idea. I'm going to write that down. Michelle and I will chat about it when Michelle gets back. They're leaving on vacation, so there'll be a couple of weeks before we work on the next podcast. But yes, Gareth agrees, ventilation shafts for sure. So are there any other questions, or gentlemen, if you would like have any other points you'd like to make before we wrap it up?
Stephen, go.
Oh, well, first of all, I just, thank you. These questions were terrific. And then I would just, and thank you also, Justin and Aaron. It's almost as though this story has written itself in terms of just how special this building is. And I feel like you all here kind of see and acknowledge that. It's hard. I do believe it's hard to imagine a more fitting place to memorialize what we've been through, and kind of the incredible efforts of those at the front lines with regards to kind of medical treatment and pushing vaccines through, etc. Aaron, I think your documentary highlights that beautifully. Just kind of this site of quarantine, but also a site of so much hope. So I am kind of a grateful recipient of something like a vaccine, and I also realize Four Freedoms Park has this. The reason it's called that is in 1941, FDR gave this speech where he outlines kind of a vision of a world based on 4 freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and this 4th one I find very poetic, kind of freedom from fear. And you can imagine kind of when something like smallpox or polio or even COVID is racing through a country or the world, we are all gripped by fear, and it's something we now kind of understand better. But that was very much FDR's story with polio, and so that thing, that scare is something we all know now very well. It's almost a little too well. And so this space just represents something so kind of, and I feel really strongly kind of that this is worth memorializing and Aaron, this building is worth saving, and your documentary sheds light on that perfectly. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Stephen. It's one thing to tell a story, and it's another thing to be proactive about future options and opportunities. And I think anybody who's ever been involved in a process like this understands that for as much as we wish that there was a blueprint, and we wished that the decision makers in our city had sort of more streamlined ways to deal with these types of things, they always seem to be one-offs. They're They're groups of people who are kind of, working to rally interested parties to basically, do the work that is required to save pieces of our stories and of our histories. And, it's not straightforward work. And I think, having a room full of people who are interested in hearing this conversation and seeing this film and looking at your presentation, I think the work that you do with the people you do, Stephen, on a daily basis is also really important. We just try to kind of share the story in a way that's also shareable. And I definitely encourage everybody who's on this, to share it with people, try to, raise more interest, because that always helps. We know that when people are interested in things, that's how things get done. And, to your point about the timing of it all, it's unfortunate, but it's also serendipitous. It's, sometimes the perfect timing just presents itself. And I think that this particular structure has been there for a long time, and only now is kind of, its future path presenting itself. And I think that as long as, everybody who has some skin in the game, kind of keeps pushing, whatever their particular piece is, I think positive things can happen, but it's not going to be without resistance. And I think that's always the frustrating reality of this type of work. But I also think that it comes, if successful, it would be just that much more satisfying and meaningful long term.
Right. No, I agree. Thank you. Right. And also, I'm sorry my video did not, decided to futz out literally 3 minutes after this thing started.
Okay. It's okay. The slides were great. I will just share with everybody who's still on the call. When we, Justin, Stephen, and I had this conversation about setting this up a few weeks ago, we really, it all just kind of clicked in terms of, here's a great opportunity for the three of us to come together, introduce or orient people to Roosevelt Island and to this structure. I know many of you know about it. Some of you might not. And what a great sort of treat to not only be able to share the background, but also talk about some things that are, new. I mean, Stephen, the work that you presented was new stuff. It was even new to me. And I think that's the important thing, is these aren't, this is not a slide deck from 2018. This is conversations that are happening right now, and progress that's, efforts that are pushing towards progress today. So, so thank you for sharing that. I hope everybody, kind of took that on, and please pay it forward in any way you can.
Thank you.
Justin, I think we have rambled ourselves good.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, just a couple of things. Thank you both very much. Stephen, I do look forward to hearing you presented in the recording, which I'm assuming it will be there. I apologize for being slightly deaf only to you. I'm not sure what happened, but I'll have to look into it. Aaron, thank you very much, not only for the film and the presentation, but also for also being co-moderator and being my ears throughout the presentation.
My pleasure.
As Aaron said, we were looking forward to this and having fun as a trio, and we did, even though I couldn't hear some of it. But as of our programming coming up, we have a packed week next week, actually, Insiders. Next Tuesday at 7 p.m., we're doing Wild City. We are doing the sewer alligators of New York City, talking about that myth of the sewer alligator. That will be a lot of fun. That's with Wild City author Tom Hines. Then on Wednesday, we're doing the Cast Iron Architecture of NYC, which is being led by the executive director of the Greenwich Village Historic Preservation Council. And I'm sorry, I'm reading the chat. Everybody, so as I already said this to Stephen in the beginning, some insiders are obsessed with my refrigerator, and Pete Tannen also is still reminding me that I owe everybody a tour of my apartment. I'm going to give you a tour of the apartment one day. One quiet week, we'll have it. You're going to be underwhelmed, but I'll show you all of my books and where all the madness happens. And then Gareth Bailey said, I bet there's a ventilation shaft behind it, meaning my refrigerator. That would be awesome. If I had direct access to the subway behind my refrigerator, I'd be the happiest man in the world. And then lastly, next week, which is a super, super great event, we are doing the nature walk. The department, the DEP is actually giving us exclusive video access to their nature walk that is only given to Untapped insiders. Open House New York tried to get it, and they turned them down and said, nope, we're doing it only for Untapped New York. That's next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. please be there for that. It's going to be awesome. They're filming exclusively this nature walk that the DEP runs here in New York. It's super, super cool. And we are the only ones who are getting it. So join us again. That's next Thursday at 5 p.m. Super excited about that. Well, thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you.
And, for these presentations, both Stephen for your work and Aaron for the, as people have said, the beautiful video. Really great to have you here. And everybody, please stay safe, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.